Southeast European Studies. I am Duda and this is my colleague Dario.
And we're delighted to be able to introduce you to our visiting fellows for this semester.
The title of my research project is Solidarity and the Remaking of Citizenship in the Post-Yugoslav States. And in short, the aim of this research is to examine changes and contexts or rhetorical use of solidarity in setting specific citizenship agendas, primarily in Serbia, but with an overview of the whole of the region. And social and political context of this research lies in transformations that have been affecting these countries since the collapse of the socialist Yugoslavia. These changes had profound effects on the new state citizenship models, and here I take citizenship both in its legal, political and its identitarian dimension, as it encompasses not only formal statuses and rights, but also issues of membership and belonging to a political community. Therefore, citizenship opens wider social questions of who belong, who is left out, what kinds of relationships co-citizens form. And these issues are not only effects of policies, but to a large extent are shaped by public discourses in which the trope of solidarity plays a significant role.
My research looks at how Muslim communities in the Balkans figure and are represented in larger EU bordering and securitization strategies that define and divide Europe from the Middle East. So I look at borders not only as physical barriers that control the movement of populations, but also as moral and political boundaries and sites of violence that produce and sustain certain social and political realities. So in this sense, I'm interested in understanding how the emergence of Balkan Islam and the production of Muslims in the Balkans as white, as secular, as European, over and against Muslims in the Middle East and North Africa, comes to solidify these borders both materially and discursively, but also through arbitrary civilizational markers. So for example, the current refugee crisis and the moral and political panic that as the refugees make their way through the Balkan route, they come into contact with local Muslims is frequently read as a security threat to the European Union in the now familiar grammar of counter-terrorism, counter-radicalization, fighting the convergence of organized crime and human trafficking and so forth.
Here in Graz, I will be working on consumer cultures in the system of Yugoslav self-management, which is a kind of new angle on the consumer culture in Yugoslavia. After dealing with daily practices of consumer culture, now I'm moving towards the politics of consumption and consumer protection. So why consumer councils? Consumer councils were the bodies formed by the representatives of citizens, representatives of different social and political organizations, and representatives of retail network, catering and other services. So starting on a very local level, the level of a village or of a city quarter, they were actually working on the negotiation process between those different factors and trying to find the best terms, the best ways of functioning of, for example, a retail network and other services in those little neighborhoods. So I think it is very important to see what was the role of those consumer councils in Yugoslav socialism, and more particularly, what was the role of individual citizens within the system of consumer protection and those consumer councils. Well, somehow Graz has been around for decades because my hometown Pula is actually sister city or fraternal city with the city of Graz, so different sorts of cooperation were going on through my lifetime up till now. As a historian, I started to cooperate with colleagues from Graz some 10 years ago. First, we had a project on tourism and leisure cultures in socialist Yugoslavia, then a small mobility project on the issues of identity and democratization in Croatia and Austria, and somehow the third logical step was to apply for visiting fellowship here and try to work here for a longer period.
Well, broadly speaking, I work on populism and anti-establishment politics. Today, at every corner of the world, we can probably label a politician, a political party, or a movement with a claim that the ruling elites have systematically ignored or continue to ignore the grievances of masses. I particularly focus on the case of Turkey and the ruling Justice and Development Party, or the AKP. I ask how different phases of populism have trickled down from high-level political discourse that AKP supports, promotes from the beginning, to different social fields. And I ask what are the linkages between those populist antagonism and the recent reversal of democratization in the country. I think AKP offers us a quite puzzling case because until quite recently the country was shown as an example to the rest of the Muslim world, and in fact the government has seemed quite committed to EU integration reforms by expanding freedom of speech and pluralism in the country. Compared to the other newly democratizing countries, Turkey has relatively longer term and stable multi-party democracy, but today what we see is increasing oppression of dissidents and increasing violation of basic human rights and freedom of speech in the country. Well, I chose the center because, first of all, the center has a recently expanded research and teaching focus to Turkey. And I think this has provided me with a very open-minded and welcoming setting to carry out my research on Turkey.
Well, 20 years after the conflicts in former Yugoslavia or more, the consequences are still there, present, visible and very relevant. There are two types of consequences. One is the structural transition of wartime networks which have bred and created a lot of political parties, and the second one is the other symbolic legacies which found their way from the conflict in modern-day politics, and they're being utilized and harnessed by the various political actors which have their origins also in the conflict and the post-conflict concept. This is, in short, what I study. I study the transition of wartime networks into political parties, and I'm very much interested to understand the consequences it had for the competition between political parties, but more important, the implication it had on democratization and peace building in the region. Well, I chose and I wanted to come to Graz because of the people. It's a great group of researchers that practically study similar issues, but they have diversity of approaches, and that creates a very intellectually stimulating environment. Of course, the University of Graz offers good resources and support for one's scientific research, but it is the group of people here at the center that makes the environment and the experience excellent.
So we are here to reenact a famous video of Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who was standing at the Ljubljanica river in Ljubljana, stating, "This is where the Balkans starts," facing, of course, southeastern. So what he wanted to do with this highly performative, of course, gesture was to point on the inconsistencies of such geographical demarcation, where of course the implied knowledge is that Europe is civilized and Balkan is violent and non-civilized. The Balkan is always the other. it lies always somewhere else, a little bit more southeast. So for Austria, the Balkan starts in Slovenia, the last fortress of slave hordes. So my project deals with representation of refugees in official media and on the internet in order to stress the fact that those representations are highly inconsistent. Why internet? The fact is that internet today functions as a form of collectively unconsciousness. For Freud, those were the small forms, dreams, associations, and of course humor and lapses. But today we can say that social networks function as a form of collective unconsciousness because of the consciousness that is postponed and superego is non-functional on those spaces. So it is most fruitful for the analysis of those representations.
So my work on memory studies is focused on the interaction between politics and collective remembrance. And some of the things that I look at in my research are the construction and destruction of physical sites of memory, sort of like this one that we're at right now. I look at commemorative events, commemorations, and other political rituals, mostly dealing with war. Most of Europe is still dealing with the World War II past. Who was in the resistance, collaboration, issues of the Holocaust, anti-Semitism. So my project here in Graz is part of my larger project Framing the Nation and Collective Identity in Croatia, which is funded by the Croatian Science Foundation, and we're looking at 7 commemorations from World War II and the war in the 1990s, the Homeland War. The specific project here is focusing on Bleiburg, and it's the communist repression and mass murders after the end of the war. So the Bleiburg commemoration has been particularly in the news in the last couple of years in Croatia. First of all, in 2012, the parliament stopped funding the actual production of the commemoration, and the election campaign promise of the opposition, which is now the new government, was about bringing back the funding of this commemoration. So this is a really hot issue in Croatian politics currently, and this is one of the biggest traumas of the Croatian nation in the 20th century, which has been politically manipulated by both sides, especially in the 1990s and continuing on to this day.